What drew you to the orientation to madrigal and the Bach and the counterpoint and the fugue?
Well, you see, I think it started when I'd played with Fiorito during the war, when, you know, I was very, very young and I wasn't draft age yet and so forth. And I played a couple of years with him, then I went to the Cincinnati Conservatory, sort of went straight, as you might say, and studied piano there, got a master's degree, and then I got a Fulbright scholarship to go to France. Well, in the meantime, I'd met a young girl who was Franco-American, and she encouraged me, and her mother encouraged me. We were sort of going out and thinking of getting married. I went to France then in '53 and decided to stay. I studied 2 years with Gieseking there in the Saar region, and decided I liked France. I'd fallen in love with Paris, and fallen in love with my wife, and we were getting married, and it was all very romantic and beautiful, all happening in April probably, as the song goes. And then I decided to stay, and I met Michel Legrand, who was looking for a pianist that could play jazz and classical piano, because he was doing some ballet music and things like that. And through him I met his sister, Christiane, who became our lead vocalist in the Swingle Singers. At that time also there was Blossom Dearie, who was living in Paris, and she formed this group called the Blue Stars, and she was looking for singers, and she asked me to come and sing in the group. And so actually all of that series of groups that happened in France in the late 50s and 60s started with the Blue Stars. Then Mimi Perrin came along, formed the Double Six. Christiane and I and two or three others that were later in the Swingles were in that group. So by the time we'd started fooling around with these Bach pieces, which we did really sort of a vocal exercise, because it was, I think it was a group of people who was always looking for new things to do, sort of new vocal mountains to conquer anyway. And I think when you have a mountain you want to climb, Bach is a good mountain to try. One nice thing about his music, you know, you can turn it upside down or jazz it up or rearrange it, and he always comes out on top anyway. I mean, he will outlive any treatment that anyone can give to his music. So then the Swingle started, and that was about '61, after this long, rather intense preparation, because all of those Double Six, the Blue Stars, we spent hours, and on our off time, I mean, it was a kind of session, the kind of thing that a jazz man does when he's off work and he wants to go out and have a good time. We were all working in the studios and doing our bread thing, but we were trying these ideas. Well, the Bach, we thought we would try some fugues, and since there were no words, of course, we started scatting, and all of us had jazz backgrounds. And that particular sound seemed to just take off. We thought it might please a few musician friends. So then the Swingle Singers lasted, the French group lasted for about 10 years, up till '73. But by that time, I really was itching to get, because so many things were happening in the '60s musically, with, of course, the Beatles and the terrific pop groups that were coming along, and folk things, all kinds of this musical explosion that was happening. I turned off Presley, I must say. I was never a great fan of his. And the early rock and roll, I sort of turned off and sort of stayed classical during that time. But then when the Beatles and some of these incredible groups came along, you couldn't ignore that. And I thought, well, good heavens, I'd like to get into some of that kind of thing, and maybe doing it in our own style. So the Swingles broke up then in '73, and I think all of us, Christiane wanted to do some other kinds of solo things, and the other people wanted to do their own thing. So I went to England and formed a group. I auditioned about 100 singers, and I was looking for people that were classically trained, that is, in the sense of having good voice placement, that kind of thing, because I wanted to do classical part songs, I wanted to do avant-garde pieces, I wanted to get into the pop scene, and of course keep the Bach going. So those poor singers that auditioned had to have a pretty vast musical baggage. But after a few, we tried out some singers, some worked, some didn't, and that lasted for 2.5 years, which time I wasn't working very much. I had to feed my wife, and by that time 3 kids. And it was a rather difficult period, but I was determined to go ahead and see what we could do with new ideas of sounds that are possible with 8 voices.
With relation to those new ideas, you mentioned the musical baggage that a candidate for the Swingle Singers has to bring. How about describing the job profile, Ward?
Well, if you're going to audition for the group, you come in, you do a classical aria, a lido, Katzen aria, whatever, then a pop song, and then I have them do some Luciano Berio, is an Italian composer that's written some avant-garde pieces for the group. Then I have them do some scatting, Bach, then I have them sight read. And once that's done, then we go to a studio and have a mic test. Because very often, of course, classically trained singers, it's rather difficult for them to scale the voice down for mics. So it's a lot to demand, and of course then I have to find out, and I can only do that once we're on the road, how they actually fit in as group animals, because I mean there's a lot of give and take that's necessary in touring, and so it's asking a great deal. I think we've got now a group, and that's the reason I've been holding back before we came back to America, because the old Swingles came over quite often, but we hadn't been here since about 71, so that's 8 years ago. And I knew that there's a whole sort of generation of young listeners that had lost contact with our work, but I wanted to hold back until I felt that we were ready and willing and capable of coming over and doing a tour. We've just been over here for a month. We've done 4 different types of programs. The Pops recital we did here in the Twin City area is one. The Sinfonia of Luciano Berio that we've done with orchestra is another. We do an a cappella program of mainly classical, some avant-garde things. And then we do one Pops program with orchestra of standards, Gershwin, Cole Porter, Bernstein things. So it was it's a big job, and there aren't, I don't believe, a whole lot of other groups. I don't know of any other group that's doing quite this thing. I think one reason is that it is difficult to tackle and difficult to get the singers trained and willing and capable to do it. We're not there yet. I mean, I'm still hearing a lot of things that I'd like to correct, but I feel now that this group is ready to do some very, very interesting work.
You have a very compatible team, I judge. How do they attack the remarkable span of musical values, lyrics and music that this program that you've outlined over the decades here? Were we doing that way back when, in the age of the madrigal?
Well, I think basically the answer to that question could be that, as far as I'm concerned, music is music. Bach, of course, improvised. Many madrigals were done in a very improvisatory way, and I think there was a whole relationship between certainly jazz conception of tempo, jazz conception of improvisation, that makes this parallel between the jazz and the Baroque so evident. I mean, I'm not the only one to have done it. Many people have jazzed up Bach or other medieval or Baroque Renaissance things. And so that's, but as far as this vast repertory that we have, I've done it purposely because I don't like so much labeling of music. I think for me, music, the equation is very simple. It's good and bad. I get very put out with people, who say, I'm a Renaissance man and anything written after the 13th century is not worth listening to, or I only listen to Stravinsky and the composers after, or Rolling Stones is the only music that I can possibly take, country and western music or whatever. These styles of music, I hope, will always be in existence. One doesn't want to have kind of Woolworth music where you get one type of music, which is a kind of muzak for the whole world. But you want the different styles. But what I do object to is people who get conditioned to, either through their schooling or through their parents or friends or whatever, to just listening and trying out one type, because I feel that you're losing so much. And today, with communications, with records available, with libraries where you can go and listen, it's so easy to find out what's going on in the world. Perhaps in the old days it would have been excusable. But now, as a matter of fact, I think certainly in America, most people are much, much more open to new sounds, and I think that was probably due to the big pop explosion in the 60s. The pop people, they used Handel, without any sense of sacrilege. They would go and use some country and western influences, some jazz influences. They put it all together. Sometimes it was successful, sometimes not. But I mean, there was a whole breaking down of barriers, which I think was very, very healthy.
I wanted to touch on this. That really was the effective result of the 60s explosion.
I think so. It was one of many, of course. I'm just speaking of this particular sense of repertory and sense of getting different styles of music together. When we do rags, we try to get to the essence of the rag style. If we're doing jazz, of course, it's another thing. If we're doing unaccompanied part songs, we'd hope that if we're doing a Saint-Saëns piece that Mr. Saint-Saëns would not be shocked. I think in our own particular case, perhaps what gives our own style, basically, because I think each group has to find its own style and not be always just adapting something else. First of all, we have 8 voices, each using its own mic, and that gives a kind of an intimacy to this group singing, which I like very much, whether it be with the Bach or the classical things or the pop things. Then we are using our voices as an instrument, and that was started, of course, in our case with the Blue Stars and the Double Six and the early Swingles, where you're, rather than, you know, when I used to study piano, my piano teacher would say, try to make your piano sing. I mean, that was the idea. You always wanted to imitate the human voice. We reversed the process by trying to make our voices sound like a clarinet or a trumpet or a keyboard instrument.
For your own professional pursuit, what have the rewards been?
Well, I tell you, if I had to tell you what my capital is right now, I would say my wife and children. I have a very close family life. I'm leaving tomorrow to go back to London, hopefully to find them all in good health. I called them yesterday and they were fine. That for me is of prime importance. I think probably would come for me perhaps before career and fame and fortune, whatever that is. But then after that, I would say the feeling of having done a job well. If you talk to the singers, I'm a bit of a taskmaster, and I do insist that they work hard. I try to find people that are willing to and rather like that feeling of having worked and getting a result. But I would say then for me, for my own personal character, that the next thing would be getting a job well done. I'm not terribly influenced. I don't like the idea of coming on like a famous person, or that makes me feel very itchy. I generally want to run away a bit when that happens. I like, though, the idea of being able to get ideas out to a large number of people, and in that sense, if you do have a certain amount of name, of course, you then get more of an access to different kinds of audiences and so forth. But I would put the product first, that is the quality of the product certainly first, and I think the other things then take care of themselves.
Ward Swingle, thank you very much for taking time to talk about the art of the vocal group, the group animals, as you affectionately call them.
Well, thank you. We've had a marvelous time here in Minneapolis. It was a lovely way for us to end this American tour, and we certainly hope to be able to come back soon.